There's a new street fighter on your windowsill. The weapon is peace, the word is chill.
Hello there, gang, and welcome to another episode of Displaying Model Behaviour, the Earth's mightiest action figure video podcast. So take off your pants, crack a beer, and let's talk toys. Let's talk about building the ultimate 1980s Spider-Man display with Marvel Legends. I did this a while ago with the classic 60s kind of original generation of Spider-Man. And of course that had the Sinister Six, Doc Ock, Chameleon, Vulture, all those classics. And of course all those characters appear in the 1980s as well, but I don't want to reuse them. I want to do specifically 1980s Spider-Man characters. So let's do it. Before we get started, if you'd be kind enough to smash that like button, if you assume you're going to like it, I think it's a safe bet. You can always unclick it at the end if you don't. But if you do, it would really help out the channel, and I'd appreciate that a lot. Right, let's do this. First up, of course, the man himself. You gotta have Spider-Man. And why the black costume? Why not the black costume? Nothing is more quintessentially 80s Spider-Man than the black costume. Yes, of course, he starts out the decade in the red and blue, but this is where we get our first ever real Spider-Man costume change. For about 20 years before then, it had always been the classic red and blue Spider-Man and a few little tweaks and aesthetic cosmetic changes here and there, but it had largely been the same. So when this guy debuted on the scene, it was a big deal, and especially when you think what the black costume would literally go on to spawn, this thing is a big milestone for Spider-Man history. And oh my goodness, Marvel Legends, you've been treating us with this new black costume Spider-Man. Of the retro wave that just came out, this was the hardest one for people to get their hands on. Creating a little false scarcity maybe? I don't know. But recently there's been a whole bunch of them hitting store shelves, so you shouldn't have any problem picking this guy up. And when you do, oh, he's just so great. With the wonderful torso swivel, the ab crunch, you can get some great poses with this, and the fact that he's bigger and bulkier than the original black costume Spider-Man on the Pizza Spidey body, it works so well because he looks like he's been sort of just jacked up by the symbiote. And then of course when he discovers the costume is alive, he ditches it and just goes to a fabric black costume anyway. So whichever version you have, it makes sense to have 1980s Peter in the black costume. Now we got someone who kind of transcends the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's the Beatle. I can't remember if I put him in my classic 60s Spider-Man display. I don't think I did, because my little noggin was saying, no, Dave. Save them for the 80s. So here is the Beatle, Abner Jenkins, who would go on to be Mac 1 and become a hero. But in the 1980s, when everything is gritty and awful, apparently, this guy was a dyed-in-the-wool villain. And he's really given a great action figure treatment here. I love the wings. So many characters now have these wings with Wasp and the various iterations of that character, but they just look so pretty when they're all spread out like that. And I love the Beetle shell he's got at the top. It actually, the design mirrors a Beetle beautifully. Now, the armored angles on here as well, it's a really nice little touch. And I've always been a fan of the Beetle character because he's such an underdog. The first time I ever read a story with him, I've mentioned this before, was when Spider-Man was literally whooping his ass, like big time. Like, I felt bad for him to the point where he hides in a smokestack and prays for Spider-Man not to find him. He's just like, please, just let me get away with this. Just let me get away with this. Don't let him find me. Of course, Spider-Man finds him, rips his costume off, and he's like, yeah, bad day to be Abner Jenkins. But this dude, with the whole armor, with the wings spread out, he looks so great in the display. Now it's time for someone who I think is a bit of an underrated Marvel legend. We've got Thomas Fireheart, the Puma, or the Puma. Strength of a bear, speed of a puma. Now, there's a lot of reuse just in the buck, but then we've got these lovely bits of fur around the ankles here and on the forearms there. I think they could have done more like this for the Tigra figure that just came out to make it feel like they've done a bit of extra sculpting. She had a little bit of sculpting, but not much. I would have liked a bit more fluff. But then the wonderful catty kind of face on this guy, it's a really nice sculpting job. They capture the look of the Puma perfectly, and again with the black Spider-Man costume, this is a pairing I always think of. Puma debuting, fighting black costume Spider-Man, they go together perfectly. And he stuck around a bit in the 90s as well, but was eventually phased out. He's still around in the Marvel Universe, will pop up occasionally, but the 1980s, that's where he was most prominent. Hard as marble, cold as ice. Tombstone. Tombstone, a great badass mob type villain, and someone who I feel is a little bit underused. He still pops up a bit in the comics, but I'd like to see more of this guy. Just a real bad dude, but with a very personal connection, not to Peter Parker, but to his extended family, with Robbie Robertson being a kid who he grew up with, and he's always had like an axe to grind against him, and now Robbie's son is dating his daughter, who is the female Beatle. It's a great sort of family drama kind of conflict going on. But at the moment, in the 80s moment, he's just a classic mean mob enforcer. But he's not a jobber either. You would have thought Spider-Man could just beat this guy pretty easily. He's just a tough dude. But when your skin is as hard as marble, that's going to prove quite difficult for people to overcome. Then with this classic Tombstone design that kind of harkens back to the sort of Dracula kind of look with the cape and the sharp teeth, it's kind of silly, but also kind of awesome. I really love it. And as far as face sculpts go, I think this is one of the most underrated Marvel Legends face sculpts. They did such a good job with this dude. Love Tombstone, quintessential 80s character. Speaking of favorites, now we have the Hobgoblin. Yes, I'm doing my Mark Hamill voice for the Hobgoblin, because he never really changed it very much from when he was doing the Joker. Okay, I'm going to drop that now. That actually takes a lot of work. But this dude, this is an example of like when Hasbro get it right the first time. There's no point in doing a new one because they cracked it already. Hence the retro Hobgoblin, bit of a step down when this is the dude who they nailed it with the fish scales, the darker, again grimier. There's a real taxi driver, Times Square aesthetic that I think of with 1980s. And of course, that's where Marvel Comics are set, right slap bang in the middle of New York. And seriously, in the 1980s, wasn't a good place to be. And these characters represent that so well. So the Grimy Hobgoblin, a perfect kind of replacement upgrade to the more fanciful, ridiculous Green Goblin. I mean, Green Goblin was still kind of terrifying. I mean, he straight up murdered Gwen Stacy. But this felt like a newer Green Goblin for a newer period. And it worked really, really well. Now, the glider, of course, I've mentioned before, this is the Toy Biz glider. So you got to go way back into time to find this thing, but it's so worth it because it just makes him look so wicked. Is this Jason Macendale? Is it Roderick Kingsley? Is it Ned Leeds? It could be anyone under the mask, but whoever it is, they look awesome. And when I think 80s, you got to think Hobgoblin. Now, similar to Hobgoblin, I love kind of upgrades and equivalents, like the modern version of an older character, and for that I have Hydro Man. He's like the new Sandman, sort of the opposite of Sandman, whereas sand is rough and coarse and it gets everywhere. Water is soft and wet and gets everywhere. That's why you need to be like water. Now, this is a figure that a lot of people kind of sleep on, but I've got a lot of love for this. Some people say, the face looks goofy and ridiculous. Well, you know what? It does, but he's a villain. He's not meant to be a matinee idol. He's meant to be a goofy thug, and that works really well. Plus, holding this up to the light, translucent blue, man, it just looks so pretty. Now, the effects on the feet, I like the fact you can remove them so you can have him looking sort of either way, but they don't really fit great. I think maybe molded would have been better, but if they were molded, it would have been difficult to maybe do ankle pivot and stuff, so it's kind of a trade-off. But as long as you can balance him just right, I think the swirling, whooshing water effects look so good. Hydra Man, he's a little sleeper hit for me. I really dig this guy. Welcome to the Model Behavior Patreon Addicts Anonymous. Who would like to speak first? I used to watch other YouTubers, but after joining the Model Behavior Patreon, I just couldn't go back. Come on, Waylon. Watch Artemis Prime with me the way you used to. No. It's that horrible Model Behavior, isn't it? You leave Model Behavior out of this!
Smithers! Smithers!
The Model Behavior Patreon, sliding into your DMs since 2020. Now, with all these villains, Spider-Man needs some backup, so let's bring out the Black Cat, the femme fatale, one of his love interests from the 80s. Kind of Mary Jane's nemesis to an extent. She was the wild side of... Mary Jane was the wild party girl, so she was the wild version of the wild party girl. More to the point, Spidey could indulge in the superheroics with Black Cat, and it's got to be kind of enticing. So this is classic Felicia Hardy. The only problem I have with this figure is she has such a plain Jane expression. It's such a shame. Everything else, I think, is great. It's really, really good, but she's swinging into action, but she doesn't look excited about it. That's a real shame. If there was just a little more intensity in her expression, it would be so good, but I really struggle to have her in an action pose when the face is saying, I'm standing in line at the post office. That's a real problem, because also the face is good. Like, it's not a bad face. Just not really appropriate for what's going on. So that kind of sucks. But the rest of the figure, I'll forgive because it's actually really well put together. And if we're talking 1980s frenemies, then you gotta have the Prowler, Hobie Brown, who started out as a cat burglar type character and then eventually sort of made amends and became a hero and a close ally of Spider-Man. So throughout the 80s, it depends on what story you're reading and what point in the timeline you're at as to whether or not he's friend or foe. But as a Marvel legend, he's decent. He's not great, but I do like some of the things that they've done. One of the unusual things about the Prowler costume is that it's a rare baggy costume. He kind of looks like he's wearing pajamas. He's got these gauntlets and some of the extra sort of contraptions that are mechanical, but then he looks like he has put this together in his house, which he kind of has. That's the great thing about Hobie Brown. He's an inventor. He's kind of like a smaller budget Batman to an extent. Now, one thing that I'm kind of moving away from with Marvel Legends is the cloth or lack of cloth cape. This big chunk of plastic here, it doesn't look great, but it does allow you to do one thing. This might be a bit of an unusual thing to do, but you can put the cape upside down, and then it looks like he's sort of falling through the air. If you want to do something kind of clever with that, I might experiment with that for the display, because that could work out quite well. Now, one thing Hasbro love to do also is they won't necessarily sculpt additions to boots and wrists. They'll just kind of like do separate pieces, but they do tend to fall down quite a lot. So that's kind of annoying about this figure. But once you get them positioned, he looks pretty cool. And now, kind of like Tombstone, we're going to go back to the mafioso, folks, with this here Hammerhead. Now, this is one of the more original figures, and we're going to stop doing this accent, because I'm just trying to turn into Taz. I might as well do commentary on AEW. Talk about Joey Numbers. Marvel Legends Jones over here. Right, Hammerhead. Thank you for letting me get that out of my system. One of the newest figures from the Spider-Man retro wave, and such a good one. I was marking out for this figure just because there's so many little things that look awesome. The face sculpt is terrific. Talking about face sculpts with neutral expressions that don't look good. This is a neutral expression that has just enough intensity in the eyes to look mean. He looks like he is about to bash someone's face in with the knuckle dusters, which themselves look so cool. I think it says, it says head across there, like bam, head to the head. Gotta love that. The baseball bat, the pinstripe suit, the fact it's a thicker, bigger body, that's great, because I used to have the Chameleon who could have the Hammerhead head, but it just looked wrong. It was a scrawny looking head on a thin suited body. Just like, well, that's clearly not Hammerhead. Chameleon, that's one of your worst disguises, whereas this is Hammerhead. Even though he's, I don't know, C-list at best, he's actually such a cool figure. I would say he's sort of essential for a Spider-Man collection, just because you need to have this legend on your display shelf because he's so damn good. And now a bit more backup for Spider-Man, we have Cloak and Dagger. I love characters who are just naturally paired together as a team. You don't get them separately as human beings would do if they are a partnership. It's like, no, you get one, you get the other. And Cloak and Dagger I was first introduced to in Maximum Carnage way back in the 90s. Now I was surprised as to how far back this duo goes. The pair of mutants, one with the cloak that can teleport and go into this dark space, and the other one whose powers are based on kind of light and projectiles. I love the yin-yang of the couple together. And this, it's not a 2-pack, you bought them separately, but it was good that at least Hasbro released them together. You didn't have to buy one and then wait 3 years for the next one, which was kind of nice. For Cloak, I love that the cloak itself is actually kind of translucent. That's really, really nice. Of course, it's a big lump of plastic, so there's not much as far as posing options go. But then I do really enjoy kind of displaying them with dagger kind of half inside the cloak. That works really, really well. Then she's got her dagger effect, sort of the throwing projectiles, which might look a little bit odd, but actually it's exactly how they were drawn in the comics. So I really dig that. So yeah, these two guys together, perfect backup for Spider-Man. And looking around this table, yeah, he needs it. We're going to get a bit animalistic now with the White Rabbit. This is a sleeper hit of an action figure. And when I say that, I mean purely for me. I don't know if anyone else cares about this, but I just think they really nailed this character. So many nice little bits of detail with the watch hanging down there. I love her rabbit makeup, the little pink nose and the expression. It's just, I feel like a lot of love has gone into this figure, and honestly, they could do with reusing a lot of this. I think this coat, I think they did use this coat for Gwen Stacy, but I'd love to see it put out for a new Mary Jane as well, because I didn't include Mary Jane in this display, because I feel like I don't have a good Mary Jane for this era. We've got a very modern Mary Jane, which I really like, came out in a 2-pack, and then we have more of the retro Mary Jane, which was the head swap with Gwen Stacy. But I'd love to have the big bouffant hair, sort of Eric Larson, Todd McFarlane type glamour model sort of MJ. That would be a lot of fun. But I'm digressing. White Rabbit, a really cool figure. Now I'm stepping outside the Legends box, which is kind of cheating, but I would use a Legend if I hadn't parted with him recently. But I do have the Mezco Moon Knight. You see, when I'm thinking about grim, gritty 80s vigilantes, that's where Moon Knight comes forward. I think that Mark Spector here is that classic sort of Batman insert type character, but not. Actually, it's very easy for people to say, oh, he's like Marvel's Batman, but only as far as sort of weapons and gadgets and stuff. The whole backstory with Khonshu and the moon and the gods and the multiple personalities and all that stuff, he actually couldn't be that far removed from Batman, so I'll completely take that back. But that's a common misconception, if anything. I mean, I literally made it just then, but at least I talked my way out of it, or talked my way into looking more confused. You decide. But Moon Knight, whether or not it's the Mezco or the Marvel Legend, which is fantastic, it's one of the better Marvel Legends from the last few years. I think it was one of my favorites, but again, I had to be cruel. Don't need to, so I went Mezco. But whichever flavor of Moon Knight you get, make sure you put him in your 80s display, because he fits like a glove. So we've been grim and gritty. Let's get a little bit silly now with Frogman. I just have images of Frogman in various pictures and front covers all throughout the 80s. Maybe he only appeared a couple of times, but when he did hop onto the comic book covers, it really stood out in my mind. And this figure, it's funny, I was telling people I was going to sell him, and then folks were like, you'll regret it. You'll regret selling Frogman. He's too good to let go. And I'm like, maybe he is, because he's just so quirky and stupid and lovable. So the character was a villain, and then that character got killed, and then his son became the heroic Frogman, and that's the one that I associate with the black costume 1980s Spider-Man. So I kind of like that this display, we're getting some villains, some heroes. It's actually building out to quite a nice sort of balance, and I've got to admit, I'm really kind of digging this. Everyone's favorite now. Shocker! Skinner! I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth! That's just how that's just something that stands out. Iconic moment in time. If you were raised in the 90s, you'll always remember that. Shocker! What a great action figure. I tell you what, the Spider-Man retro wave is being well represented in this display, and rightly so. The amount of work that's gone into doing all the quilting on this character. Controversial opinion, you don't need to add the black lines. I think it looks perfect like this. The eyes, you can see the lines. That's all it needs to be. They're just drawn black in comics, in my opinion, just to show that it's a quilted sort of costume. They don't need to actually have the lines. The shadows that go into those lines tell that to you. I think it's just great. Such a cool figure. Just chunky as well. He looks threatening and ominous. He's got the sort of squinty eyes expression. I could go on and on. I love the fact that you can change the whole gauntlet, so he's got that sort of just curling the fingers into a fist, or just full on pow kind of fist vibration sort of effect going on. Absolutely dig Shocker, and such a, in my mind, again, I'm going to say that Q word again, quintessential 80s Spider-Man villain, popping up all the time, and a great street-level thug as well. That's what Spider-Man should be about. Not cosmic threats, not aliens, not freaking devils, demons, and Satan. No. Street thugs, robbing banks, causing chaos, mad scientists, and personal issues. That's what Spider-Man is all about, and Shocker is a prime example. Back to the frenemies now, and we have Silva Sable, Silva Sablinova, the leader of the Wild Pack and frequent ally and occasional enemy of Spider-Man. As a female body, I think this is actually really well put together. She's got a bit of a neutral sort of expression, bit of a Felicia Hardy kind of problem there, but at least she is kind of a stone-cold Soviet super spy type character, so it makes sense that she's not overly emotional, so I can kind of headcanon that, let that go. And then with the silver body, loads of people have used this for a Lilandra custom. Works really well from what I've seen. But yeah, with the pockets, the pouches, everything that goes on here, it's not the most kind of elaborate, exciting figure, but really it's all you need to do for a perfect Silver Sable. I think that works great. Also, she teams up, if I recall correctly, which is often a bit of a struggle, I think she teams up with the Puma occasionally. He's kind of like Wild Pack adjacent. That works. If you have Paladin, who I used to, and then I sold, but if you do, then she goes perfectly with Paladin too. She's a great one to have. Teams up with a lot of people, and that makes her quite valuable to any big collection display. And finally, one of Spider-Man's ultimate big bads, of course it is, Venom. Just squeaking into the 80s. I always had Venom in my mind as a 90s character, but no, it was 1988, Amazing Spider-Man 300, when Venom actually debuted, and let's face it, the symbiote was several years before then, and so was Eddie Brock. I didn't realize that Eddie Brock actually was a mid-80s character. They really established him incredibly well before turning him into Venom. I always just kind of assumed that they were like, oh, we need to make Venom, oh, let's just create this Eddie Brock character, and then we'll make him Venom. No, he was around for a while. I've got to go back and read more comics because you get such a better appreciation of these characters. I'm just me giving a lesson to myself there. But yeah, Venom. So many different versions of Venom you can pick up from Marvel Legends these days, but this I still feel from the Absorbing Man wave is the quintessential one. Is he perfect? No, he's not perfect, but he's close. I think if they had the sort of cell shaded one, but in these colors without the cell shading, that would look ideal, I think. But still, so great, iconic, I mean big time Spider-Man villain, to the point that even since Venom, I don't know if they've had a A-list Spider-Man villain who's been introduced. They've tried with characters like Morlun and, I mean, Carnage, yeah, but I mean, he's sort of an offshoot of Venom. This was the last big AAA type villain, I think, that was introduced. So yeah, of course, he's going to get a prominent place in the 80s. And folks, that does it for my 80s Spider-Man display. I really enjoyed putting this together. I've been meaning to do it for ages, and finally I've got round to it. And like so many things in life, I think, why didn't I do this sooner? This is so much fun. So now, I'm gonna have to bring on the 90s, but we've got a lot to do before then. The next video coming out is gonna be Extinction Agenda, as told by Toys. That's gonna be a special Patreon sponsored episode. So if you want to sponsor your own story for an As Told by Toys episode, then you can do by going to patreon.com/display model behavior. Throw a few shekels my way and you can nominate a story that I will do my own kind of Jackanory type reinterpretation of for you. Guys, thank you so much for watching. It's always a pleasure. What do you think of the display? Who did I remember? Who did I forget? You know who I remembered because you just saw me talk about them, but who is missing that you think should go into a 1980s Spider-Man display? Guys, thanks so much, and until next time, keep displaying model behavior.
Hey there, did you enjoy that video? Well, this is some advice from your friendly neighborhood Daredevil. Wait a minute, that's not me. Deadpool. I'm not editing this. If you want to support this channel further, then join the 6-1 Clicks by clicking the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Or even better than that, you can go over to patreon.com/displaying model behavior, where if you sign up, you can watch all of David's exclusive videos. You see all those pretty people down there? Yeah, they're all the Patreon subscribers, and each one of them gets a free back rub and shiatsu when they join. That's not a guarantee. Anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, keep displaying model behavior.
Also, if you want to pick up a badass Displaying Model Behavior t-shirt, they're so smooth and soft and just feels like a hug when you wear them, then you can do by going to teespring.com. Check the link in the description below. Also, I gotta say, I've got over 21,000 subscribers and I've sold about 13 t-shirts, so I might have to start naming and shaming about 20,987 people. I'm not afraid to do it, okay? Look forward to that video coming up.
Big time.